not entitled. We've just been told this story ever since we were young. You know what? If you get a good degree, you get a good job, you get a house, have children, raise a family. But now we see that there's a lot of factors that are impeding us being able to do that.
I think definitely young people are starting to lean more towards Nietzschean philosophy rather than, let's say, Aristotle or Plato or Christian philosophy.
The young people have bad manners, contempt for authority, and they show disrespect to their elders. Socrates, 400 BC.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Libby Znaimer and Marissa Semkiw.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Libby Znaimer, and I am a Zoomer.
And I'm Marissa Semkiw, and I am a millennial. Today, we'll round out our discussion on the generational divide. To recap, a British series called Mind the Age Gap attempted an experiment where two groups of people from opposite ends of the age spectrum lived together for 2 weeks.
What ensued was not civil debate, but rather a host of heated arguments and intemperate words over issues ranging from religion to politics. But before we dive in, let's tee up the topic with highlights from the series, Mind the Age Gap.
We live in a divided nation, where young and old don't even speak the same language.
You've got bare swag, mate.
I don't know either word.
I really don't know if it's an age thing or not. It's like a foreign language to me.
I say the lady from the shop because she's a gorgeous lady and I love her to bits.
They're in the 21st century. I just think move with the times, like...
12 strangers from 2 different generations are trying to understand each other.
You know that young black lads are not very well educated, are they?
He's racist, in my opinion, don't care.
What do you believe in, like? Do you believe in God?
Probably more aliens.
Jesus Christ.
They clearly think quite differently to the way I do.
I've got to say, it's a different world.
Go away.
I still look at him and want to vomit on him.
They're not coming here to sit on their bums or sit on the street and beg. It's not our country.
It's my country.
You can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Excuse me just a minute.
Will living together push them further apart?
It's a noise.
Get over it, you stupid...
I can't take it.
Or will they learn to bridge the age gap?
I feel humbled by you all.
Well, I remember when I was younger, my generation was always pushing for more and more freedom. It seems to me that this generation wants less freedom, at least less freedom of expression.
I think that's true because of the desire to control the presence of opposing opinions. What used to be considered debatable, there's this push to keep things, you know, off the charts. We can't hear this, we can't talk about this. We need trigger warnings, we need safe space. And it goes beyond just saying that word is rude or that's impolite, or you shouldn't say this, you should ban this. The boomers as a generation pushed for more. We want to say anything, we want to do anything, we want to hear anybody, we want... You know, now there seems to be, keep me protected, don't let me read these books, don't expose me to these novelists, don't make me hear these words. I don't feel safe. And that's a new idea.
Suzanne, do you agree or disagree?
I think with freedom of expression, we need to understand that people can speak and say what they want, but there's consequences to those actions. So if you're going to say something racist, fine, say something racist, but understand you can get called out for saying something racist. If you're going to say something problematic, there will be people ready to hold you accountable. There's also people who just don't want to see their institutions supporting racist and problematic individuals benefiting from being on their campuses.
We succeed the most in a free contest of ideas, and that's why Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects our freedom of expression. But if you're going to advocate for genocide, Section 318, or if you're going to cause hatred, Section 319, or print hateful material, then there are restrictions there. Canada has that restriction. The U.S. does not have that restriction. But how far should that restriction go? Well, unfortunately, I think our generation is imposing this more upon your generation because young people want freedom. It's part of their DNA.
It's part of what they don't want to hear certain things. Leslie, what do you make of it?
I'm sitting here with 2 white men who probably don't have a clue.
Sorry about that.
Well, they don't have a clue what my existence is in the world. And I also am feeling now, based on our earlier discussions, I'm the only queer person at the table that I know of. Nobody else has come out. So I am with that side.
Okay, well, how about, you know, this is the thing. Would you disagree, Jay, that there's a problem when speakers that are specifically extremely conservative, such as people like Ann Coulter, for example, couldn't even give a speech on Canadian soil? It was shut down by protesters. Do you recognize that as being a problem, or something that we need to work toward fixing?
I think it's obvious that there's a difference between, let's say, disagreeing with a person and voicing that disagreement versus shutting them down or fostering a culture where people do shut down other speakers. We could go to Ben Shapiro, Milo Yiannopoulos, Charles Murray. Maybe they have controversial things to say about the world that we live in. Maybe they have truthful things. Maybe they're lying. But like, we need to. I mean, sunlight is the best disinfectant. We disinfect it through our ideas and debates and conversations, not through violence, not through forcing people not to speak.
Are these protesters not representative of the majority of millennials?
There's a squeaky, annoying, particularly like this minority of people. Some of them are even funded, in fact, who just they go to events and they disrupt it and they cause a lot of violence.
And when it comes to specific people, and I can't speak to everybody that's ever been thrown off of a campus, but when specific people are perpetuating hate speech and are supporting certain ideologies that are harmful to particular identities.
Like
if you're being racist, if
Nazis?
you're being transphobic, if you're being homophobic, if you are a Nazi, I don't think a private institution that I pay money to should be supporting you coming on campus and spewing that hate.
Yeah,
if you are conservative and you're just majorly conservative and you have very conservative views, that is fine. Come here, I might disagree with you, I might not be conservative, but you can come here.
Should texts be deleted from curricula? Because they're all written by white people?
Well, it depends on what they're saying.
Well, no, regardless of what they're saying.
I don't think a white person doesn't have credit.
Because the course was Eurocentric.
Yeah, I went to McMaster. They wanted to take down the statues, the marble white statues, because it was all white men who were representative of people who've done great things.
By the way, I'm not even debating the merits. I'm just saying that the climate seems to be, and to be fair, it may only be on campus, it seems to be one of limiting, restricting. I don't want to hear, I don't want to engage in these opposing points of view. I don't want to hear them. I don't want to have to refute them. I just want them not to be here.
And wait a minute, there's another thing, and what you said reminded me, where you said that you don't think anyone else at the table is gay. I think that we can air your point of view and maybe understand it, even if there's nobody else exactly like you on the panel.
I don't get that point. How stupid is it to tell these men that because they're white men, they don't have they shouldn't be here, or maybe their opinion is ideas.
You see, you're talking over me. I said I'm sitting here with two older white men who have privilege, who probably will not understand where I am coming from in the world. That is what I said. As a Dyke elder who is differently abled, as an immigrant, we have a general way of understanding what's going on in the world, but there are different points of view. And I have found that working in many communities, older white men have a certain amount of privilege that all of us, 1, 2, 3, 4 of us, do not have.
A lot
saying.
of generalities, and it starts to sound awfully bigoted.
Yeah.
Because you're saying that I have some kind of white privilege.
But you do.
White privilege.
Well, but also, we also don't know what's going on in their particular families.
We need to look at systems, and we need to look at who built these systems. They were built off of white men. They were centralized around the identity of white men. When we look at who had power, when European settlers first came here, who had power?
Too racial?
Come on.
Are you saying I speak too racial?
What is that supposed to mean?
It's too bigoted to focus on the color of someone's skin.
White privilege is a reality,
but
though.
It's a reality. Let's just back off that for 1 second. When I hear the word privilege, it only seems to work in one direction. You're completely correct. I have no idea what you've gone through. It would be fatuous of me to sit here and say I understand exactly what you've gone through, but you don't know anything about me. You don't know what gay people or transgendered people may be in my family and in my life, and there are. You don't know what differently abled, My mom died of MS, was in a wheelchair all my life. I grew up with that problem. You didn't know that. You don't know anything about me. You see the color of my skin, and all of a sudden I'm typecast. And to me, that's just as wrong as accusing me. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that I disagree with what you want to accomplish. Yeah. I'm not sitting here saying everything's fine. Yeah. But it works both ways. And if you start to throw around these generalities with your generalizations when you don't know about the other person, I think that you undermine A, your ability to get sympathy and support, and B, the intellectual honesty of your position.
Okay, and we'll be right back after a quick break.
Numerically, there is a massive gap between attendance in church or a place of worship between the millennials and older folk.
You drink alcohol and eat pork. Yeah. So you sort of like you're a semi-Muslim or you're a full Muslim?
Semi-Muslim, like. You can easily be led down the road of all Muslims against Britain. And of course that's not true at all. I think there's a huge problem because Muslims fervently believe that there is life after death. They know they're going to go to a better place anyway, and that's where you get suicide bombers from.
Christianity is very close like Islam. They lost their way in Western society. I think you can be gay and you can be Muslim.
I think the way you live your life is more important.
Exactly. No one has a right to judge, do they?
Welcome back. That was a scene from earlier on in the series where Naaman, a self-identified gay Muslim, is being questioned by Kevin, 62, about his relationship with Islam. Kevin asks how he can be a true Muslim if he eats pork and drinks alcohol. Libby?
Well, I think part of the problem is that the older man obviously didn't know a lot of Muslims in his life to see that there are differing levels of observance just as there are with every religion.
Yeah, it's a spectrum. Obviously, Kevin's ideas don't comport with Naaman's, and it isn't surprising, I think, to see a spectrum of different identifications, but is this a generational issue? I guess let's put that to the panel.
Well, I certainly think there is a generational issue, and I think that it stems back from the education of our world today, which is very postmodern in its focus, where there is no truth, where everybody has their own truth. And really it stems from, if you get back to it, you look at the Gay Science written by Friedrich Nietzsche, nothing to do with homosexuality, all about God being dead, that there is no life after death, that there is no reward for living a good life, and there is no penalty for living a bad life. So therefore, do whatever you wish. This is the bedrock of postmodern thought today, which is predominantly
people have questioned
taught.
The tenets of religion for a very long time. It's not just this generation. I mean, our great-grandparents were doing it.
But it leads to a position where Adolf Hitler and Mother Teresa get the same thing.
I don't think so.
Numerically, there is a massive gap between attendance in church or a place of worship between the millennials and older folk.
Well, not millennials and boomers, I don't think.
I think generally speaking, like, that is the philosophical bedrock of what an irreligious society is basically based off of. That's relativism. I bet most people who are atheistic or spiritualists won't recognize that because they just don't think deeper about it. But that is a philosophical rock, is moral nihilism, is that, and that is a pure danger within our society, and I think definitely young people are starting to lean more towards Nietzschean philosophy rather than, let's say, Aristotle or Plato or Christian philosophy. And there's a sad part also is that there's research and study to even prove that when people, they replace their religious values, they start to find values in other things. So you were talking about Nazism, neo-Nazism. One of the reasons why that actually occurred is, and this is not like on the surface, this might seem like a stretch, but you connect the dots. You read Gulag Archipelago, you watch, you listen to the lectures that people have done who've been in the Soviet Union. It's not a far stretch, is that once you start losing your religious ideology, you enter into moral relativism, but then you find value in things that like race and things like ethnicity and things like nationalism is that when you start to lose your moral religious foundation, you become an ideologue and other things. But this is in the Western world. It's not in the Islamic world. I just want to make that very clear. In the Islamic world, they're increasing.
They're
becoming more and more.
Yeah. The one point you said that is unarguably true and which is generational is that the baby boomers in college, say 1970-ish, 70 to late 70s, were not exposed to the same degree to a dominant I'm talking about the humanities, to a dominant ideology of postmodernism to the same degree as today. We're starting, but so the notion that there were some truths or that there were some absolutes, that there were certainly there was a body of knowledge that had to be absorbed, the so-called Western canon, good or bad, but that's what the boomers encountered. They're knowable things, there are knowable events, there's a foundation here. Let's learn it first and then we'll pick it apart. Today, from the get-go, you can get a BA in English literature from Harvard University and never study Shakespeare, but you can't get one without studying Toni Morrison. So the idea that nothing is absolute, nothing is known, everything is relative, everything's in the eye of the beholder, even if you agree with that, that's the dominant ethos that the millennials are exposed to. It was not the dominant ethos that the boomers were exposed to.
I was born and raised Catholic. Stopped believing that God was a thing when I was like 14 or 15. I believe in science. I think that God is a great method of control over societies, and religion is a good way to bring people together. But you know, I think I look at my parents' generation, and I see a lot of them now starting to just admit that they never believed that there was a man in the sky controlling everything, and they're finally getting the guts to do it as their parents die. So in a way, like if you grow up going to church, and I did as a kid every Sunday, but not the way that my parents did in Catholic schools with nuns smacking them, and not the way that their parents did with, you know, the law saying like in French Canada you have to have this many kids or whatever it was. It's getting a little bit more lax, I think.
Well, I think another major difference is that your generation has been raised on Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. You've studied, and you referenced that you believe in science. Yeah. But you reference, and the Bible of Charles Darwin is his book, The Origin of Species, but most people don't even understand the groundwork of it, because if you look at the rest of the title, by means of natural selection or the preservation of the favored races in the struggle for life. And then you wonder, when you build this bedrock of thought into a generation, and then you see the rise of favored races in the struggle for life, you wonder where it comes from, but it's in black and white on the front page of the book. But we leave these things out, and this is why we need freedom to speak and freedom to share ideas, and anyone can choose whatever faith they want. We must have freedom of religion. You know, we have Christian faith, and you're an agnostic, not an atheist.
Right, yeah.
And we express each other to each other. We're free to do so. And then we have a truly free society. But once we start saying that, no, you can't say this and you can't teach that, or even using pejoratives, positive or negative. And remember that the greatest butchers of human history have been atheists. You have
and
Lenin.
Lots of butchery in the name of
look
religion.
at Lenin and Mao Zedong, and I mean they killed
in their hearts. Maybe that's.
Okay, hold that thought. Stay right there. We'll be right back.
When I walk into a room, I don't have the ability to identify myself. People just see a black woman, and then people associate me with the stereotypes associated with black women. That happens to me all the time.
Trump was, whilst all the protests were going on around the world about his Muslim ban, he was at home watching Finding Dory.
That's how stupid he is.
Now that Donald Trump is in power, Nigel Farage should be made UK ambassador to the US. For f***'s sake. First, can I ask who Nigel Farage is?
The UKIP leader. He's the UKIP leader in here.
Well, what's a UKIP leader? Only skilled migrants should be allowed to move to the UK.
Well, do you realise, right, that immigrants put more into the country than they take out?
Exactly. They work harder than people that live
what?
here.
If they are skilled.
No, they're not. If they're not skilled, they're not.
Well, are you going to let me talk or not?
So we now turn our attention to the growing ideological and political divisions along generational lines. In the UK's vote to exit the EU, for every Leave voter under the age of 24, there were 3 over 65. In the US, Trump got 53% of the over 65 vote compared to 37% of 18 to 29-year-olds. Marissa.
You know, it's a good question. I don't know what this tells us. Is there a generational divide here? Do people get more conservative? I mean, empirically speaking, those numbers would suggest that there were more boomers, people over the age of 65 that supported the Brexit vote, and as well as Donald Trump. So is there a divide here? What do you guys think?
We have different experiences, and that's what it comes down to. Boomers grew up in a different generation than the millennials. We have access to different information, and that informs our views.
Okay, you know what the different experiences? Number one, boomers vote. Younger people don't.
No, you're completely right.
And so when they count the votes, boomers have a bigger impact. That's number one.
You're so right.
And I think that with a lot of those things, it looks like age, but I don't think it really is age. I think it's socioeconomic, and a lot of those white male voters are people who have been left behind by technological advance. They're people who used to make a good living in the kinds of jobs that are disappearing, manufacturing jobs, and they're angry.
I think it goes back to what I believe is this continuum between freedom and responsibility. And as you get older, responsibility takes over a little more because you have children, you may even have grandchildren, and then you're looking at things more carefully instead of just looking to pay your rent or your mortgage or whatever. You're now looking at things ideologically and saying, is this best for our society? And that's when you get politically active.
Well, I would like to jump in and say, in terms of voting in queer communities, because there isn't one queer community, we vote. Because if we don't vote, change will not happen, and it affects our lives greatly and deeply. So we make a point. Millennials and elders, we get together and we campaign and we vote.
Just going back to the clip we just watched, though, Dee, she's 83, reveals she was for the Brexit vote, supported Donald Trump, and in that she starts to feel alienated, because what happens very quickly is the discussion about politics descends into a question about her character. That feels new to me. Has that ever been the case before the millennial generation? Is there a divide there? That's what I'm trying to get at here.
I think the millennial generation has popularized, identity politics and connecting political activism and just politics in general to who you are as a person.
I don't think identity politics was near the level it is today. I mean, today you can't just be Jim. You're Jim the white man, or Jim the African, or you're this, I don't even know why you would always introduce yourself according to your sexual behavior. I mean,
there's a difference between...
I don't understand. It's all identity.
I don't introduce myself based on my sexual behavior. I introduce myself based on my politics.
Okay,
you interpret it as sexual behavior.
Why can't I just be Charles? Why do I have to be the fat white guy?
Honestly, I'm going to jump in there because that is a privilege that I know y'all all hate this word, right? But literally, when I walk into a room, I don't have the ability to identify myself. People just see a black woman, and then people associate me with the stereotypes associated with black women. That happens to me all the time. You're not a woman. You're not a black woman, so you can't speak on my experience. But you're not a woman, and you're not me. And I'm speaking about my experiences, and you can speak about yours.
If I walk into a Black Lives Matter crowd, they're going to look at me as a white woman.
What I'm saying is, people have always people who aren't visible minorities minorities, or who aren't racialized, or who aren't represented or like perceived as different have always had the privilege of walking into a room and being like, you're Jim, you're Bob, you're Kathy, but I'm never Suzanne first. I'm always a black woman first.
That's extreme.
No, this is true. And this, you can see this with statistics. You can see with
that sometimes you are, but
not
not always.
invalidate her experience.
You can't tell me what I do or do not experience. This is my life. And this is 22 years of my life I have lived, and this is what happens to me.
Go with that. Just stay there for a minute and through the filter of generations again. Sorry.
Yeah.
So one would look at in my view, the debasement of language. So what does it mean to invalidate? Okay, so clearly, no one's saying that it's factually untrue. Nobody's saying, no, this didn't really happen to you. I'm sitting here and I know your biography and I think that's not the case. So I accept everything that happened to you. But where the boomers check in and where the millennials, and I think one of the biggest weaknesses, the misfortunes to hit the millennials, if I may say so, as a generation, is social media, because it enables you to say stuff and then kind of leave it out there and never take it further. So the big question that boomer would ask is, and therefore what? What next? What are you going to do? What do you want me to do? What are the tangible, practical things that stem from your experience, number one? And number two, be careful, I'm not speaking to you, but as a generation, to not employ double standards of invalidating other people's experiences of which you are as ignorant as they are of your experience.
Exactly.
Okay? So when the common denominator meets in the middle, and I think the Gen Z coming online are going to be much more practical and pragmatic than the millennial, is to say, okay, this is all true, it's all very interesting. You're not making it up, but so what? What do we do about it?
I can give
and
you
that's
very
been the
clear
frustration. That's the frustration between the boomers and the millennials.
Well, the good news is everyone can be a Zoomer if they're lucky. Okay, we'll be right back with more of the Zoomer.
You're seeing for the first time, and it goes right to the core of Zoomer. What a Zoomer is, the reinvention of aging is trickling all the way down. The boomers are younger when they're old. The millennials are younger. So the boomers say, oh, wait a minute, when I was your age, well, if 90 is the new 60, why shouldn't 30 be the new 15?
It's even, but it's even,
We didn't realise that we was being a bit loud.
I went to bed, the girls didn't. Wow, not feeling it this morning.
Did we keep everyone up really bad?
Yeah, it got really bad last night. I think it's quite embarrassing and disrespectful.
I'm not apologising to nobody.
They just said they're not apologising to anyone. That's the first thing she said when she woke up. I just think it's a lack of respect, but it's my opinion. It's like living with kids.
Morning.
Morning, Bob.
Morning.
Morning, Ed.
Morning.
Morning, Lindy.
Have you got anything to say?
Huh?
Have you got anything to say?
Well, actually, before I say anything, why do you, out of everyone, need to come upstairs and tell me that I need to apologise or I need to do anything? Why do you need to
have respect for
why
everybody.
do you need to have respect? Why do you need to add your 2 pence in? How did you know I wasn't coming down to apologise?
Straight away, like that, rah, 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 top of her voice, shouting.
You want to talk about there's 85-year-old people in the house now that haven't got no respect? I have got more than respect than you, I'm telling you.
Obviously not.
I really do. Why? Why haven't I?
Because you're running around screaming at 3 o'clock in the morning.
We all had to listen to that last night, and now everyone's got to listen to this today.
How dare you come and go and bring them...
What do you mean, how dare I?
How dare you?
Don't start on me. Don't start shouting
What
at
do you
me like
mean?
you just shouted at it.
So is it just a matter that we young people were not taught to respect our elders? You know, millennials have been called the me generation. They have this reputation of being entitled, this reputation of being narcissistic. Why is that?
But they're only called me because boomers were called me. Boomers were the first me generation.
We're the mini-me's.
Now, by the way, the young people have bad manners, contempt for authority, and they show disrespect to their elders. Socrates, 400 BC.
Yeah, I was just about to say, like,
what else is new?
What else is new, man?
Also, the millennials, I feel, want everything that the boomers have. However, the boomers are standing in the way.
Yeah.
I think we're not entitled. We've just been told this story ever since we were young. You know what? If you get a good degree, you get a good job, you get a house, have children, raise a family. But now we see that there's a lot of factors that are impeding us being able to do that. And like, we've been told this is what we're going to get.
Well,
but now we're not getting it. So are we entitled, or were we just given false statements?
You're absolutely true, but it's also true. I think it's a bit of a myth that every cohort of boomers had it easy, because there were bad times, there were recessions. I remember when I graduated from university, things were not good. At first, I had to go overseas to get a job the way some millennials do now.
And I think the biggest problem with me hearing millennials being labeled as entitled, I always think of it as that we're lazy, we're living in our parents' basements, we think we should get things without working. Whereas everyone I know, everyone my age, like I've been working, I started babysitting when I was 13, I worked at McDonald's in high school, I worked all through university as a bartender while studying, and like, I know I'm not unique. I am far from unique. A lot of people my age, we work hard. We work really, really hard to get to where we are. And so then it's a kind of a slap in the face for boomers to say, oh, like, you entitled kid. It's like, I have 2 degrees. I worked my butt off for this. Like, I'm not entitled. I deserve to have a place in society. I worked really dang hard for it and continue to do so.
And that's the danger of speaking in broad generalizations about these groups of people. Boomers that are right-wing boomers that are left-wing boomers, as evidenced by this table, you know? And so, you know, but there is something that is driving the 2 generations apart, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but there seems to be this massive divide, as evidenced by this entire show. What is it?
Well, I think circling back to the very beginning, I think the problem is that the normal cycle of aging and exit has been severely delayed, if not stopped altogether. So me being the older half of the boomers. So when I came onto the job market, with recessions, with ups and downs, nevertheless, age 65, gold watch, see you later, retirement, corner office now empty, everybody moves up one, and I step on the bottom of the escalator. And that was true at that time. Now, that retirement end is not happening for a lot of reasons. There is a fight, you mentioned voting, for public funds between pensions and education, money going to healthcare to prolong life versus other needs. So there's an intergenerational tussle over a pie that ain't growing. And so you're seeing for the first time, and it goes right to the core of Zoomer. What is Zoomer? The reinvention of aging is trickling all the way down. The boomers are younger when they're old. The millennials are younger still. So the boomers say, oh, wait a minute, when I was your age, well, if 90 is the new 60, why shouldn't 30 be the new 15?
It's even, but it's even worse than that. It's even worse than that, because we, the G7, have stolen $50 trillion from your generation. America has $20 trillion in debt. Canada's $1 trillion in debt. Our governments are paying so much on interest, they can't put the money into infrastructure and universities and building, and we're not going to have to pay it back. You are. And the millennial, you should be screaming about it, because you're the ones that are going to have to work hard to pay the debt that we have created, and we spend it all on ourselves.
And when we return, we'll hear from the audience.
I think any logical person would say that religious views are not valid. They're not logically consistent. It makes no sense. That is not inconsistent with religious views being good or being not good.
Well, welcome back. We'll hear from the audience now. Bobby, thank you for being at the roundtable.
Okay.
What's your question?
The question is, are religious views valid, and are religious views a good thing? In terms of are religious views valid, I think any logical person would say that religious views are not valid. They're not logically consistent. It makes no sense to believe that the literal religious views that constitute the Bible. And although this may be in your face and confrontational, I think we have to be sincere in admitting this. That is not inconsistent with religious views being good or being not good.
Well, what my question back to you would be, yes, you have the freedom to express your position, but I find that your position is condescending, and you are saying that religion is illogical. I find it to be very logical, much more logical than atheism or even agnosticism. So I think we need to respect each other and say, you're an atheist, and that's fine. And you know what? You're my friend, you're my citizen, you're an atheist, that's fine. But I'm not going to say that you're illogical because you're an atheist. Well, I'm not going to use derogatory terminology against you, and that's where I think civil discussion erodes once you start throwing stones. It's sort of like a schoolyard bully.
Sometimes it's very dangerous to draw conclusions when you have insufficient evidence for those conclusions.
All right,
You've concluded that I'm an atheist. I am Jewish. I observe the laws of kashrut, which is very, very inconvenient. I lay tefillin every morning, which is something that has to do with prayers. And yet, I have to admit that logic, my background, I'm an amateur mathematician, and I'm a great supporter of Bill Maher, but logic dictates using common sense. So when you say I'm being condescending, I sort of resent that because I do not intend to be condescending.
All right, so I sort of agree with you and sort of disagree with you. All right, so as Aristotle would say, there's 3 types of intellectual virtues. There's the intellectual virtue of logic, there's the intellectual virtue of empiricism, and there's the intellectual virtue of, let's just for the sake of argument, call it faith-based intellectual virtues. Now, a lot of these intellectual virtues are interlaced. You say that a God it can't be proven by, I would assume that you would say a God can't be proven by science, can't be proven by logic. Well, neither can, like, let's say neither can empirical realities. You look at empiricism, you have to say, hey, I trust in my senses, I trust in my experiences. By saying that, you're saying I'm going to use a portion of faith-based intellectual virtues to confirm my empirical intellectual virtues. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Well,
a lot of these, that's why you got to separate religion and science. They're 2 different forms of thought. But to say, so I agree with you in saying that religion in some sense is illogical or irrational. But in another sense, I would say it's a different form of thinking. It's a little bit different from, let's say, hard science and hard mathematics, in the same way that empiricism is a little bit different from pure logic.
Thank you, Bob, for your question. Okay, stay right there. We'll be right back with some final thoughts.
On Facebook, Ross makes a comment about our show on the federal government's proposed tax reform for small business. They need more money to come from somewhere. $1 trillion debt doesn't balance itself. Lisa tweets her thoughts on our Universal Pharmacare show. It's time to continue where Tommy Douglas left off. It's time for Pharmacare for all. Thank you to everyone for your ongoing feedback. Keep the comments coming, and don't forget to visit www.thezoomertv.com for full episodes and news updates.
Welcome back. We'll hear final thoughts from the panel now, starting to my right.
Yeah, of course, there's a generational divide. I think that will continue for many years, and the debates and conversations will be annoying, but I think this is just something that we just have to deal with.
I think one thing we've learned today is just like generalization is not a thing that can ever happen with any community, any person, whether it's the boomers, whether it's the millennials. And second of all, I hope that people take away that when I particularly speak, like listen to everything I'm saying. Don't centralize yourself in the words that I'm saying. When I say I faced racism, I don't mean that you individually are a racist. I mean that I have faced it and this is a lived experience of mine. Same with when I face misogyny. So moving through the world, I hope you listen to marginalized communities, their full stories, not just centralizing yourself and being like, well, I don't do that, so it can't be true.
I've learned a lot from you three and my fellow millennials and our lovely host today. And I think that this is what needs to happen more, exactly what we're doing here, to bridge any sort of generational divide, any sort of racial, economical, sexuality, any sort of divide between people. Like, let's talk. Let's get it out in the open. I think it's been very enlightening. We've touched on a lot of really great, important topics, and I'm glad to have had the chance to do this.
So I'll say again, I'm on the wrong side of the table because I'm not your typical boomer. But I will still say intergenerational connections are really important. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to speak about queer issues. And one day, all of us will be Zoomers, as you said. So let's learn how to work with each other.
The intergenerational cooperation is particularly important for the millennials in a way that it hasn't been before, because the millennials are on the receiving end of the reinvention of aging, which means that the boomers are not going anywhere soon. And so these challenges are still going to exist. But the good news is, as you said, we're all going to be Zoomers. And since I seem to be the guy with the quotes, I'll leave another one of my favorites that speaks to the intergenerational problem. Mark Twain. When I was 15, I thought my father was the biggest idiot in the world. When I was 21, I was amazed at how much he had learned in the last 6 years.
And I do agree that this type of discussion puts ideas on the table, and people realize that the generalities, the pejoratives, are not helpful. People can disagree with honor, and we can put forward ideas, and then society and even ourselves, we can then decide what is the best idea, what way do I want to follow. But if we try to silence certain people because we've somehow labeled them as part of an identifiable group that we don't like, then we're going to run into further trouble. And I think a program like this does a lot to bridge the generational gap, but also the identity gaps.
Well, thank you all for being here. It has been a fascinating conversation, and we hope an enlightening one. We'll see you soon. It's time to zoom out.